The first person to turn against me wasn't my husband. It was my mother. Even now, when I think back to everything that happened, that's the part that still surprises me the most. Affairs happen. Marriages fall apart. People lie. None of that is new. What I never expected was how quickly the people who had known me my entire life would decide I was capable of something I had never done. My name is Claire Bennett, and I was 35 years old when my entire family stopped speaking to me because of a story my husband told them. The day it started felt completely ordinary. I was standing near the copier at work, trying to finish a report before lunch, when my phone lit up with my mother's name. I answered automatically, expecting the usual conversation about family plans or a recipe she'd forgotten to write down. Instead, I heard her say, "I can't believe you did this to him." There was no greeting, no warmth, no explanation. Just an accusation. At first, I genuinely thought she'd called the wrong person. "Did what?" I asked. "Don't play dumb, Claire." The irritation in her voice caught me off guard. My mother and I had argued before, but she'd never spoken to me like that. "What are you talking about?" "He told us everything." My stomach tightened immediately. "Who told you everything?" "Ethan, my husband. The man I'd spent 8 years building a life with. The man whose coffee I still made every morning because he liked it stronger than I did. The man I believed I knew." "What exactly did Ethan tell you?" For a second, I heard nothing except her breathing. Then she said, "He told us you've been cheating on him." The words were so absurd that I almost laughed. Almost. But something in her tone stopped me. This wasn't gossip. She believed it. "Mom, that's insane. He said it's been going on for over a year." "It's not true." "He said you gave him an STD. My grip tightened around the phone. "What?" "And he said when he confronted you, you laughed at him." I remember looking around the office as she spoke. People were walking past, carrying folders. Someone was talking near the break room. A printer started humming nearby. Everything around me kept moving, while my entire world seemed to stop. "Mom, listen to me carefully. None of that happened." But I could already hear the shift in her voice. The conversation wasn't about finding out what happened. It was about informing me that she'd already made up her mind. "You need to stop lying," she said, "after everything Ethan has done for you." Then she hung up. I stood there staring at my phone for several seconds. At first, I thought there had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe Ethan had exaggerated something. Maybe someone had twisted his words. Maybe my mother had heard a rumor and jumped to conclusions. Then I texted my brother Marcus. No response. I called my sister Natalie. Straight to voicemail. An hour later, I discovered she'd blocked me on social media. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. Something had happened while I wasn't looking. Something deliberate. I left work early and drove straight to my parents' house. The entire drive, I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to figure out how any of it made sense. It didn't. By the time I pulled into their driveway, my hands were shaking. My father opened the door before I reached the porch. The look on his face told me everything. He wasn't surprised to see me. He was disappointed. "Dad, what is going on?" "You need to leave." I actually thought I'd misheard him. "What?" "You heard me." "No, not until someone explains why everybody suddenly thinks I cheated on my husband." His jaw tightened. "Because Ethan told us the truth." "The truth." Hearing that word nearly took my breath away. "Dad, I have never cheated on Ethan. He showed us messages." "What messages?" "Photos, hotel receipts." I stared at him. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "That's not what Ethan said." The conversation felt surreal. I kept waiting for someone to ask me a question. Any question. Where had I supposedly gone? Who was I supposedly seeing? Did I have an explanation? Nobody asked. The verdict had already been delivered. All that remained was the sentence. "Look at my phone," I said. "Look at my calendar. Look at anything you want." His expression didn't change. "We'll talk when you're ready to be honest." Then he closed the door. Just like that. I stood on the porch staring at the wood for several seconds, half expecting him to open it again. He didn't. Eventually, I walked back to my car and sat there alone. I wish I could say I cried. I didn't. I think I was still too shocked to fully understand what had happened. The sun was already setting by the time I drove home. From the outside, everything looked normal. The porch light was on. Both cars were in the driveway. The flower beds I'd planted last spring were still blooming. For a few seconds, I sat behind the wheel, wondering if maybe I should turn around and keep driving. Instead, I went inside. Ethan was sitting on the couch watching television, completely relaxed, completely comfortable. He looked up and smiled. "How was your day?" That was the moment something inside me shifted, because no innocent person would look that calm while their spouse's entire family was turning against her. "My family cut me off today." His eyebrows lifted. "What? Why?" The performance was almost convincing. Almost. My mother says you told everyone I cheated on you. For a split second, something flashed across his face. Not guilt. Calculation. Then it disappeared. Claire, I don't know what you're talking about. The lie came too easily, too smoothly. My father said you showed them evidence. I talked to them because they were worried about us. Worried about us? I've been unhappy. I stared at him. The simplicity of it was almost impressive. He wasn't denying the damage. He was changing the language around it. You told them I had affairs. I shared concerns. You told them I gave you an STD. I told them how I felt. That was Ethan's real talent. He could make something cruel sound reasonable. He could take a lie and wrap it in enough soft language that people stopped questioning it. The more I listened, the more one thing became obvious. This wasn't an impulsive conversation he'd had with my family. It was a strategy. He'd been laying the groundwork long before I realized there was a problem. By the time I figured out what was happening, everyone had already chosen sides. You enjoyed this, didn't you? His expression hardened. Don't be dramatic. You destroyed my relationship with my family. No, Claire, your actions did that. What actions? He looked away. I'm not having this conversation tonight. Then he unmuted the television. Discussion over. The ease with which he dismissed me was almost worse than the accusation itself. I went upstairs before I said something I'd regret. For months, I'd been sleeping in the spare bedroom more often than not. At first, it happened because Ethan said he wasn't sleeping well. Later, there was always another reason. By then, we'd become experts at pretending distance was temporary. Inside the room, I locked the door and sat down in front of my laptop. For several minutes, I just stared at the screen. Then I remembered the security cameras. 2 years earlier, after a break-in down the street, Ethan had insisted we install them. At the time, it seemed smart. Now it felt like the only thing standing between me and complete insanity. I logged into the system and started checking recordings. The first few days showed nothing unusual. Deliveries, neighbors, me leaving for work, Ethan taking out the trash. Normal life. Then I went back further. A week, 2 weeks, a month. At first, I thought I wasn't going to find anything. Then I saw her, a woman I'd never met walking confidently up our front path in the middle of a workday. The door opened before she even knocked. Ethan stepped outside. The smile on his face wasn't the smile he gave neighbors. It wasn't the smile he gave friends. It was intimate, familiar. The kind of smile people wear when they're happy to see someone they shouldn't be seeing. I watched him pull her into a hug and lead her inside. 4 hours later, she left. Before walking away, she touched his chest. Then he kissed her, right in front of the camera. For a long time, I couldn't move. I just sat there staring at the screen. Then I started searching again. And what I found was worse than a single affair. Much worse. The deeper I searched, the more footage I found. Some women appeared only once, while others came back repeatedly over several months. Some appeared once. Some appeared repeatedly. All of them arrived while I was at work. All of them left hours later. By 3 in the morning, I had downloaded dozens of clips. I backed them up to multiple drives, sent copies to myself, checked everything twice. Then I sat in the dark, listening to the faint sounds of Ethan moving around down the hallway. That was when the final piece clicked into place. Ethan hadn't accused me because he believed I was cheating. He accused me because he was. And somewhere along the way, he'd decided that if his affairs were ever exposed, he wanted to make sure nobody believed me first. The more I thought about it, the more terrifying it became. This wasn't just a husband trying to hide an affair. This was someone who had spent weeks, maybe months, carefully positioning himself as the victim. He'd planted stories, built sympathy, turned my own family into witnesses before there was even a trial. And suddenly the calls, the accusations, and the cold looks from people I loved made perfect sense. By the time the sun started rising outside my window, I wasn't confused anymore. I finally understood exactly what Ethan had done. And for the first time since my mother's phone call, I stopped wondering how to defend myself. I started thinking about how to prove what really happened. I didn't sleep at all that night. I tried. Around 4 in the morning, I stretched out on the spare bed and closed my eyes. But every time I drifted off, another image from the camera footage replayed in my head. Another woman walking through my front door, another smile on Ethan's face, another reminder that the life I thought I had wasn't real. What haunted me most wasn't even the cheating. It was how carefully he'd prepared for the possibility of getting caught. Most people who have affairs spend their energy hiding them. Ethan had spent his energy doing something far more dangerous. Long before I knew anything was wrong, he'd already started shaping how other people would see me. By sunrise, I understood that this wasn't simply a marriage crisis. It was a reputation crisis. And if I handled it emotionally, I'd lose. Around 7:30, I heard him moving around downstairs. The coffee machine started brewing. Cabinet doors opened and closed. The sounds were so ordinary that they felt almost insulting. I sat on the edge of the bed for a few moments, gathering myself before heading downstairs. Ethan was standing at the kitchen counter pouring coffee into his favorite blue mug. When he saw me, he smiled. "Morning." The casualness of it made my stomach turn. I found myself wondering how many times he'd greeted me like that after spending an afternoon with someone else. How many lies could fit inside one person before they stopped recognizing themselves? Still, I smiled back. "Morning." For a second, his eyes lingered on me. He was studying my face, searching for something. Tears, anger, suspicion. I gave him none of it. I poured myself coffee, checked my phone, and acted like nothing had changed. The relief on his face was subtle, but I noticed it. Good. Let him think he was still in control. The entire day felt unreal. I answered emails, sat through meetings, and nodded through conversations I barely heard. Every few hours, I opened the secure folder on my phone just to reassure myself the videos were still there. They were. Every single one of them. Each clip confirmed the same thing. Ethan hadn't made one terrible mistake. He'd been living a second life. When I got home, Ethan was sitting exactly where I'd left him the night before, watching television as if nothing unusual had happened. It would have been almost funny if it hadn't been my life. "We need to talk," I said. He muted the TV and sighed. "About what?" "About us." The exhaustion that crossed his face looked rehearsed. "Claire, I really don't have the energy for another fight." "That's okay." His expression changed immediately. I don't think he expected me to agree. I sat down across from him and folded my hands in my lap. "I think we should have a family dinner." His eyebrows rose. "A family dinner?" "Both families." For the first time all day, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Not panicked. Not scared. Just uncomfortable. The way someone looks when a conversation starts heading somewhere they hadn't prepared for. "Why?" I shrugged. "Because everybody already believes they know what happened." He leaned back. "Nobody thinks badly of you." I laughed before I could stop myself. "My father wouldn't even let me into his house." That wiped the smile off his face. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "People are emotional." "Exactly." I held his gaze. "Which is why I think we should all sit down together." His fingers tightened around the remote. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish?" "Nothing complicated." I smiled. "I think everyone deserves the full story." The look that crossed his face lasted less than a second. But it was there. For a brief moment, I saw uncertainty in his face. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed it, but after 8 years of marriage, I knew Ethan well enough to recognize when his confidence slipped. For the first time since this started, Ethan looked worried. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because family shouldn't be involved in our marriage." The irony was almost painful. I stared at him for several seconds before answering. "That's an interesting position considering you're the one who involved them." He looked away first. It wasn't much, but it told me everything I needed to know. That night, he barely touched his dinner. Later, he spent nearly an hour outside on the patio talking on his phone. When he came back inside, he looked calmer, like someone had reassured him. Maybe one of the women. Maybe a lawyer. Maybe a friend. I didn't know. What I did know was that he still thought he could get out of this. The next morning, I started making calls. My father answered after 3 rings. "What?" No greeting. No hello. Just suspicion. "I'd like everyone to come to dinner Saturday." A long pause followed. "Why?" "So we can talk." "We already know what happened." I stared out my office window. "No, Dad. You know what you've been told happened." The silence that followed felt different. Not softer, but less certain. Eventually, he said, "We'll think about it." Then he hung up. My brother was even colder. When I invited him, he accused me of trying to manipulate everyone. My sister never answered the phone at all. Instead, she sent a text saying she didn't think the dinner was healthy. I remember reading that message 3 times. Not because it was cruel. Because it was strange. Nobody seemed interested in hearing my side. They only wanted confirmation that Ethan's version was correct. By Wednesday evening, something shifted. My father called back. "We'll be there." That was all he said. No apology. No explanation. But it was enough. Once he agreed, everyone else followed. By Thursday, both families had confirmed. 14 people. My parents. My siblings. Ethan's parents. His sister and brother-in-law. Everyone. Exactly the audience Ethan had created when he started spreading lies. Now they'd all be in one room. Thursday night, Ethan finally asked the question he'd been avoiding. We were standing in the kitchen when he looked up from his phone and said, "Are you sure about Saturday?" I dried my hands on a towel. "Why wouldn't I be?" He shrugged. "It just seems unnecessary." I studied him for a moment. Then I smiled. "Does it?" His eyes narrowed slightly. There was tension in the room now. Not loud tension. The quiet kind. the kind that settles in before a storm. "You know what I think?" I asked. "What?" "I think you're worried." A short laugh escaped him. "Worried about what?" I met his gaze. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." For the first time since we'd started talking, he didn't answer immediately. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt longer. Eventually, he laughed again. This time it sounded forced. "You're becoming paranoid." Maybe. Or maybe I had finally stopped believing everything he said. Friday evening arrived, the night before the dinner. The night before everything changed. Ethan spent most of it pacing around the house, checking his phone, making calls, sending messages. At one point, I walked into the living room unexpectedly and found him staring at his screen with a look I hadn't seen before. For the first time, the concern on his face looked genuine. The second he noticed me, he locked the phone. Too late. I'd already seen enough. His confidence was slipping. Around 10 o'clock, he knocked on the spare bedroom door. When I opened it, he looked exhausted. Whether that exhaustion was genuine or strategic, I honestly couldn't tell anymore. "Can we talk?" "Sure." He leaned against the doorframe. For a moment, he just stood there. Then he said, "Maybe we should cancel tomorrow." There it was, the request he'd been building toward all week. I kept my expression neutral. "Why?" "It doesn't feel right." "What doesn't?" "Bringing family into this." I almost laughed. The man who had spent weeks turning my family against me was suddenly worried about family involvement. The hypocrisy would have been amusing if the situation weren't so serious. "That's very considerate of you." "I'm serious." "So am I." He lowered his voice. "You're not planning anything crazy, are you?" The question hung in the air. I knew what he was really asking. "Do you know? Have you figured it out? Are you about to expose me?" I looked directly at him, long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then I smiled. "That depends on your definition of crazy." Something flickered across his face. The first genuine uncertainty I'd seen from him. It disappeared quickly, but not before I noticed it. A second later, he forced a laugh. "Forget I asked." Then he walked away. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway before closing the door. After that, I opened the folder one final time. Every video was exactly where I'd left it. Every timestamp, every recording, every lie waiting to collapse under its own weight. The next evening, everyone would finally be sitting in the same room. For weeks, everyone had been operating inside Ethan's version of events. By the next evening, that carefully built story was finally going to fall apart. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. I was looking forward to it. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, the kind of day people usually associate with weddings, birthdays, or family celebrations. Everything about the day felt normal, which somehow made it worse. I woke up before my alarm and sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that slowly went cold in my hands. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of a car passing outside. A few weeks earlier, I would have spent a morning like that wondering how to save my marriage. That morning, I was wondering how many lives were about to change before dinner ended. Around 9 o'clock, Ethan finally came downstairs. He looked exhausted, though not in a physical sense. It was the kind of fatigue that comes from carrying a secret for too long. "Morning." Neither of us mentioned the dinner. We didn't need to. It was sitting between us already. The entire morning passed that way, both of us polite and careful, pretending everything was normal when neither of us believed it anymore. Around noon, Ethan disappeared into our bedroom and stayed there for almost an hour. He was dressed more formally than usual, wearing dark slacks, a navy button-down shirt, and polished shoes. He looked less like someone attending a family dinner and more like someone preparing for a court appearance. Maybe he felt it too. Maybe part of him already knew where this was heading. We drove separately. His suggestion. He claimed it would make things easier if emotions got out of hand. I agreed immediately. The truth was, I couldn't imagine sitting beside him in a car for 30 uninterrupted minutes. Not anymore. The restaurant was located across town in a quiet area known for private events and business dinners. Earlier that week, I'd reserved a private room and specifically requested access to a television screen with HDMI capability. At the time, the manager probably assumed I was preparing a presentation. In a way, I was, just not the kind he expected. I arrived early. The room was already set up. 2 long tables pushed together. Soft lighting. A television mounted on one wall. The manager showed me how everything worked before leaving. As soon as the door closed, I connected my laptop. Then I checked everything repeatedly until I was certain nothing could go wrong. Every video loaded correctly. Every timestamp appeared. Every backup file was accessible. Good. No surprises. No technical problems. No opportunities for Ethan to wriggle out of what was coming. The first guests arrived 20 minutes later. My brother came in first. He gave me a brief nod but didn't smile. Then my parents arrived. Seeing them walk into the room hurt more than I expected. A few weeks earlier, I would have hugged them without thinking. Now it felt like we were strangers meeting in a courtroom. These were people who had known me my entire life. People who had celebrated birthdays with me, graduations, holidays. People who had once promised they would always believe me. Now they sat as far away from me as possible, not because they knew I was guilty, because they thought they did. Then Ethan arrived, and the room changed. His mother stood immediately. His sister hugged him. His father shook his hand and asked how he was holding up. Everyone treated him like the injured party, the man who had suffered, the man who deserved sympathy. I watched it happen without saying a word. What struck me most wasn't the attention itself. It was how comfortable Ethan seemed receiving it. He moved through the room like he'd rehearsed this role so many times that it felt natural. Every concerned question, every sympathetic look, every reassuring hand on his shoulder. He accepted all of it. And for a moment, I found myself wondering how long he'd been preparing for this. Not the dinner. Every sympathetic look. How many conversations had he carefully guided? He accepted all of it. And for a moment, I found myself wondering how long he'd been preparing for this. Not the dinner. This hadn't happened overnight. Ethan had been constructing this version of events for weeks. Maybe longer. By the time I discovered what was happening, most people had already accepted it as fact. The room filled gradually until all 14 seats were occupied. Conversation stayed polite but strained. Nobody seemed comfortable. Everyone knew something important was about to happen. They just didn't know what. Dinner came and went. Food arrived. Plates were cleared. Small talk struggled to survive. I noticed my mother repeatedly folding and unfolding her napkin. My brother barely touched his meal. My sister checked her phone every few minutes. Across the table, Ethan continued playing the role of patient victim. A few years earlier, I probably would have admired how composed he seemed under pressure. Now I understood it differently. Confidence is easy when you think you're controlling the story. Eventually, the waitstaff cleared the final plates and left the room. The door closed behind them. And suddenly, everyone became quiet. I stood. 14 faces turned toward me. Some curious, some impatient, some openly skeptical. I rested my hands on the table. Thank you for coming. Nobody responded. That was okay. I hadn't invited them for conversation. I'd invited them for clarity. For a moment, I looked around the room. At my parents, my siblings, my in-laws, the people whose opinions had shaped my life. Then I took a breath. A few weeks ago, almost everyone in this room stopped speaking to me. Several people shifted uncomfortably. My father looked away. My mother lowered her eyes. Nobody argued. Because it was true. I didn't understand why at first. Then I learned Ethan had been telling people that I cheated on him. Across the table, Ethan sighed heavily. The sound was subtle but deliberate, as if hearing the accusation itself caused him pain. I ignored it. He told people I'd been having affairs. Nobody interrupted. He told people I gave him an STD. My mother's expression tightened. He told people I laughed when he confronted me. The room felt smaller somehow. More crowded. More tense. Finally, Ethan's mother spoke. Because that's what happened. The certainty in her voice surprised me. Not because she believed it. Because she believed it completely. I nodded. Thank you. She blinked, clearly expecting an argument. Instead, I looked back at Ethan. Before we go any further, I'd like to see the evidence. His posture changed instantly. Just slightly. Most people probably missed it. I didn't. His sister spoke before he could. He already showed us. I'm sure he did. I smiled politely. But let's see it together. Nobody moved. I kept my eyes on Ethan. You have the text messages, right? Yes. The photographs? Yes. The hotel receipts? A pause. Brief, but noticeable. Then he nodded. Yes. Perfect. I spread my hands. Let's look at them. For the first time all evening, Ethan appeared genuinely uncomfortable. Not angry. Not offended. Uncomfortable. The room waited. Seconds passed. Then he cleared his throat. I didn't bring them. The response caught several people off guard, including his parents. You didn't bring them? I asked. No. Why not? His answer came immediately. Too immediately. Because I thought tonight was about accountability. A few people nodded. The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, until you thought about it for more than 2 seconds. I smiled. Interesting. Then I turned toward my laptop. Because I brought mine. The room went completely still. I connected the cable. The television screen flickered to life. Behind me, I heard a chair move. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The first video appeared. Date. Timestamp. Front door camera. Nobody spoke as the footage began. A woman approached the house. The front door opened. Ethan appeared, smiling, waiting. Then he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her inside. The room remained silent because everyone understood exactly what they were seeing. As the footage continued, it became harder and harder to reconcile the man on the screen with the story Ethan had been telling for weeks. And they didn't know what to do with it. The video continued. Hours later, the same woman exited the house. Ethan followed. Then came the moment neither of them had realized was being recorded. A kiss. Casual. Natural. The kind people share when they assume nobody is watching. The video ended. No one said anything. My brother stared at the screen. My mother's mouth slowly opened. Across the room, Ethan's face lost color. Only slightly. But enough. What is this? He asked. I looked at him. Security footage. His father frowned. His sister looked confused. His mother looked frightened. And suddenly the version of events Ethan had spent weeks building started to crack. The room wasn't on his side anymore. Not completely. Not automatically. People were starting to ask questions. Real questions. The kind he'd worked very hard to avoid. I clicked the next video. Then the next. And the next. The deeper I searched, the worse it got. Some women appeared once. Others came back repeatedly. The dates stretched across months, making it impossible to dismiss any of it as a single mistake. The same pattern every time. By the third video, nobody was looking at me anymore. Every eye in the room was fixed on Ethan. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he looked exactly the way I'd felt for weeks. Around the table, nobody stepped in to defend him. His parents stayed silent. His sister looked away, and even the relatives who had supported him for weeks suddenly seemed unsure what to say. For the first time all evening, Ethan was completely alone. His father slowly stood up. Ethan. The room turned toward him. Tell me I'm missing something. Ethan said nothing. His father's expression hardened. Did you tell everyone Claire cheated because you were cheating first? For several seconds, Ethan just stared at the table. He looked around the room as if searching for someone willing to help him explain what everyone had just seen. Nobody did. I never thought she'd find out. The second the words left his mouth, several people around the table closed their eyes. Because it wasn't a denial. It was an admission. My mother sat back in her chair as though all the strength had suddenly left her body. Oh my God. The atmosphere in the room changed completely. Nobody was discovering new information anymore. They were finally accepting what the videos had been showing them from the beginning. Marcus was the first person to look at me. The guilt on his face was impossible to miss. I should have called you. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry. Because I honestly didn't know what to say. A month earlier, he would have been one of the first people I called when my life fell apart. Instead, he'd stopped answering altogether. Natalie wiped her eyes. I'm sorry, Claire. She shook her head. I blocked you without even asking what happened. Hearing the apology hurt more than the accusations had, because it reminded me how easily they'd all believed him. The dinner ended quietly. Nobody seemed interested in dessert or coffee anymore. People simply wanted to leave. People gathered their things and left in small groups, avoiding eye contact with Ethan as they passed. The same people who had spent weeks comforting him now seemed unsure whether they even knew him. When I finally walked out of the restaurant, the parking lot was almost empty. Only Ethan's car remained. He was leaning against it, waiting for me. The drive home was silent. Inside the house, Ethan followed me into the kitchen. You wanted to embarrass me. I stared at him. Of all the things he could have said, that was the one he chose. You embarrassed yourself. His jaw tightened. I made mistakes. Mistakes? I laughed. You cheated on me for months. He looked away. That told me everything. For the first time since we'd met, he wasn't trying to convince me anymore. I think he finally understood there was nothing left to save. 3 days later, Ethan moved out. Half the closet was empty. His shoes were gone. The spare key sat on the kitchen counter beside a short note that said he was sorry. I read it once, then threw it away. 2 weeks later, I filed for divorce. He didn't contest much of it. The fight had already happened. He'd lost it at the restaurant. My father called a few days after the divorce paperwork was filed. The apology sounded awkward and uncomfortable, but for the first time since all of this started, it felt sincere. Then my mother called. Then Marcus. Then Natalie. None of those conversations erased what happened. None of those conversations fixed everything. Some damage takes longer to heal than people expect. But at least they finally wanted to hear me, and after everything that happened, that was enough. Years later, when people ask what hurt the most, they usually expect me to talk about the affairs. What stayed with me wasn't the affairs themselves. It was how quickly people I loved accepted the worst version of me without asking a single question. I lost my marriage long before that dinner. What I got back that night wasn't my husband. It was my name.